drive back into Caldwell took about 4 hours, and I spent most of it with the radio off. There's something about that stretch of highway through the Tennessee hills, the way the kudzu climbs over everything like it's trying to swallow the whole state, that makes it impossible to think about anything except where you're going and why you left. I'd left Caldwell at 22. I was 31 now, and I was going back because my father was being honored at the County Veterans Memorial Dinner, and my stepmother had called to remind me 3 times that I was expected to be there. Not invited. Expected. Those are different things. And she knew it. My stepmother's name is Renee. She married my father when I was 16, 8 months after my mother passed, which everyone in town thought was very practical of both of them. Renee had been widowed 2 years earlier. She had a son from her first marriage, a boy named Tate, who was 2 years younger than me, and who Renee treated like he was made of something rare and irreplaceable. She wasn't cruel to me exactly. She was just very good at making clear where things stood. I was the daughter from before. I was the one who looked too much like my mother. I was the one who, according to Renee, had always been dramatic, always been difficult, always been too much. When I enlisted at 18, she told my father it was because I couldn't get into a decent college. When I made rank faster than almost anyone in my unit, she told the neighbours I'd probably just gotten lucky. When I stopped coming home for holidays, she told people I was too proud to visit. I never corrected any of it. I had learned early on that correcting Renee only gave her more material to work with. I'd been out of the army for almost a year when the dinner invitation came. Out isn't quite the right word. Transitioned is what my discharge papers said. The truth was more complicated than either word, and I wasn't ready to explain it to anyone in Caldwell yet. As far as my father knew, I had left the army because my contract was up, and I decided not to re-enlist. As far as Renee knew, or chose to know, I had left because something hadn't worked out. She had mentioned this on the phone, the 3rd time she called. "I'm sure it's been a hard adjustment," she said. "Leaving like that. Not everyone's cut out for that life long term." I said I was looking forward to seeing my father. She said, "Of course. He'll be glad you made the effort." I drove those 4 hours with the radio off, and I thought about the dinner, and about my father's face when he sees me walk in, and about how many people in that room would have heard Renee's version of my life. There are roughly 6,000 people in Caldwell County. My father's family has lived there for 4 generations. Everyone knows everyone, and everyone had heard something. The Caldwell Veterans Memorial Dinner was held every year at the American Legion Hall on Route 9, the one with the flagpole out front that always flew the POW MIA flag alongside the Stars and Stripes. I'd been to it as a child, sitting between my mother and my father, while older men were called up to the front and given plaques and handshakes. My father had been called up twice before, once for his service in Desert Storm, and once when he'd been named the county's Veteran of the Year. Tonight they were honoring him again, this time with a lifetime achievement recognition that the post commander had apparently been planning for months. I pulled into the gravel lot at 6:47. The dinner started at 7. I sat in the car for a minute and watched people file in through the double glass doors, men in their VFW caps, women in church clothes, a few people I half recognized from a decade ago. The parking lot smelled like cut grass and the specific diesel exhaust of the county, which is a smell I associate with being young and not yet knowing what I wanted. I got out of the car. I was wearing civilian clothes, dark slacks, a navy blazer, nothing that would draw attention or need explaining. That was intentional. My father was near the entrance when I walked in, surrounded by 3 men from his old unit who were laughing about something. He saw me over one of their shoulders, and his face did the thing it always does, that flicker of surprise followed by warmth, like he needs a moment to recalibrate. He came over and hugged me, and for a second it was just him and me and none of the rest of it. "You look good," he said. "You doing okay?" "I'm good, Dad. You look like a man getting an award tonight." He laughed. "Don't make it weird." Renee appeared at his elbow approximately 30 seconds later. She was wearing a cream-coloured blazer and the pearl earrings she wore to every event in Caldwell because she believed they communicated a certain kind of woman which I think was the point. She looked me up and down once, the way she always did, fast enough to be deniable. "You made it," she said. I said I would. "You've said that before." She smiled when she said it, so it landed like a joke. My father was already being pulled back toward his friends, and Renee and I were left standing 2 feet apart near the coat table. "Tate's here with his fiancée," she said. "They're at table 4. I put you at table 6. I nodded. Table 6 was near the back, near the kitchen. I knew this hall. I knew exactly where table 6 was. I found my seat and said hello to the couple beside me, a man named Gary who'd served in the Navy in the 90s, and his wife, who worked at the county school board. They were kind. They asked how long I was in town for. I said just the weekend. Gary asked what I did now, and I said I was in a transitional period, which was true and vague enough that it didn't invite follow-up. Across the hall I could see Renee holding court at the family table, table 1, right up front, positioned so my father could look over and see her when they called his name. Tate was there with his fiancée, a pretty woman named Ashley who I'd met once at Christmas 2 years ago. Tate leaned over to say something to Ashley, and she laughed, and I watched Renee watch them with that particular expression she had, the one that meant she was exactly where she wanted to be. The post commander opened with remarks about the county's history of service. A colour guard brought in the flags. Everyone stood, and I stood with them, and I thought about the last time I'd stood at attention in a room full of people in uniform, and how different that felt from this, the weight of it, the specific gravity of collective discipline. This was softer. This was community. It wasn't lesser for that, just different. Dinner was served, chicken and green beans and rolls that came in a basket lined with a cloth napkin. I ate and talked to Gary about the Tennessee Volunteers season and to his wife about the school board's budget situation, and for a while it was almost just a dinner. Renee came by the table around the time they were clearing the plates. She didn't sit down. She stood at the corner of the table with her hands folded, like she was making a brief stop on a longer journey, and she said, "I was just telling some folks that you'd been in the army. They didn't know." "Okay," I said. "I told them you'd left, that it just wasn't for you long term." She paused. "I hope that's all right." I didn't want to get into all the details. Gary looked at me, then at Renee, then back at his roll. "That's fine, Renee," I said. "You know how people talk," she said. "I just thought it was easier to keep it simple. You left. You're figuring things out. That's a perfectly respectable thing." She smiled at Gary's wife. "Not everyone who serves makes it a career. There's no shame in that." She walked away before I could say anything else, which I think was also intentional. Gary's wife touched my arm very briefly, just a light touch, like she was acknowledging something she didn't have the full context for. I appreciated it. The awards portion started at 8. The post commander went through 4 honorees before he got to my father, and each one was walked through their service history with the kind of reverence that small towns are actually very good at when they choose to be. I watched my father from across the room, the way he leaned forward when the other men were called, the way he clapped with his whole hands, the way he'd always cared about this community, even when the community was complicated. When they called his name, the room stood. He walked up to the front in his VFW jacket with his pins lined up the way he'd always kept them, and the commander read his service record, the years, the deployments, the commendations, and my father stood there with that expression he gets, the one where he's trying not to be moved and is failing at it, and I felt something tighten in my chest that I didn't have a clean word for. Love and complicated and proud and tired, all at the same time. They gave him a plaque and a shadow box with a framed photo from his unit and a small American flag that had flown over the state capitol. He shook the commander's hand and said a few words into the microphone about service and community and about what it meant to be from a place that remembered. People wiped their eyes. Renee wiped her eyes. I wiped mine, which surprised me. It was after the formal program, during the part where people mill around with their coffee and pie, that it happened. I was standing near the back wall with my coffee, talking to no one in particular, watching my father work the room the way he always had. Gary had introduced me to a few other people, a woman who'd been in the Air Force Reserves, a man who'd done 2 tours in Iraq, a retired police officer who knew my father from way back. We were mid-conversation when I noticed a man in dress uniform making his way through the room. He was a tall man, silver-haired, moving with the particular economy of someone who has spent decades being the most important person in a room and has made peace with it. He wore his uniform the way certain people wear their own skin, without any apparent awareness that it was something that could be put on or taken off. 2 stars on his shoulders, several rows of ribbons above his left breast pocket, including ones I recognized and ones I didn't. He was talking to the post commander near the front, and then he was shaking my father's hand, and then he was scanning the room. His eyes landed on me. He started walking over. I set my coffee cup down on the nearest table. He stopped about 2 feet in front of me, looked at me for one moment with an expression I recognized, the assessment, the recognition, and then he extended his hand. "I wasn't sure that was you," he said. "Didn't expect to see you here." "My father," I said, nodding toward where Dad was standing. "Of course." He shook my hand firmly. Then he took one step back and said, in a voice that was not loud but that carried, the way voices in certain registers always do, "It's an honor. Truly." And he saluted me. Not a casual thing, a full, formal salute. The kind that does not happen unless it is meant. The room went quiet the way rooms do when something shifts in them. Not all at once, but in a wave, starting from the people closest to us and spreading outward. I returned the salute. "Because that is what you do. Major General," I said. He smiled. "I heard about the confirmation. Congratulations are in order." He glanced around briefly. "Your people here know what you've been up to." "Not exactly," I said. He laughed. "Just once." "Of course not. There's always how it is with the good ones." I should explain something. When I left the army, I didn't leave the way Renee had told people I left. I didn't leave because something hadn't worked out, or because I wasn't cut out for it. I left because I was asked to accept a federal appointment, a civilian intelligence position that required me to step away from active military service before the role could be formalized. The process had taken almost a year. The confirmation had come through 6 weeks ago. I hadn't told anyone in Caldwell because there was nothing to tell yet that I was allowed to tell, and because I'd learned not to explain myself to people who had already decided what the explanation was. The man who had just saluted me was Major General Wallace Coffey, who I had worked with twice in the last 4 years, most recently on an interagency task force that I am not going to describe in detail because some of it is still classified. He had been driving through the region for a family obligation of his own, and had heard about the dinner from someone at the post, and had stopped in to pay his respects, the way military people sometimes do when they're passing through a place that holds this kind of event. He had not known my father was being honoured here. He had not known I would be here. That is the part that I keep coming back to, the part that still feels unreal to me even now. Of all the events, in all the counties, in all of Tennessee, he walked through those doors. I became aware of my father standing about 6 feet away. He had heard, or he had seen the salute, or both. He was standing very still, with that plaque in his hands, looking at me, and his expression was one I had never seen on his face before in 31 years. It was not pride, exactly. It was something more interior than pride, something that looked like a man realizing he had missed something enormous while he was looking the other way. Renee was beside him. Her face was white, not embarrassed white, not surprised white, the specific white of someone who has been telling a story for a long time and has just been handed evidence that the story was wrong, and who has not yet figured out what to do with that evidence in public. Gary's wife was nearby, and she caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod I have ever received from another human being. But it said everything it needed to say. Major General Coffey stayed for about 20 minutes. He talked to my father and told him that he was proud to meet the man who had raised me, which I watched my father receive like something physical, like something he had to hold on to in order to stay upright. He talked to a few of the other veterans. He was gracious and unhurried and completely at ease, the way only people who have nothing to prove ever are. Before he left, he shook my hand again. "Don't be a stranger," he said. "The work needs people like you." "Yes, sir," I said. And then he was gone, and I was standing in the American Legion Hall on Route 9 in Caldwell, Tennessee, in my dark slacks and my navy blazer, and the room was still a little quiet. My father found me by the coat table near the end of the night. The crowd had thinned. The volunteers were folding up the long banquet tables. Someone was running a push-broom across the far end of the hall, and the overhead fluorescents were giving everything the end-of-event harshness that makes everyone look older than they are. Dad stood beside me, and neither of us said anything for a moment. "You want to tell me what that was about?" he said finally. "Which part? Any of it?" I looked at the flag on the wall, the one they kept mounted above the service board, flanked by photographs of county veterans going back to the Second World War. There was a photograph of my grandfather in there somewhere. There was a photograph of my father from when he was 24, leaner and with more hair, and with that same particular expression he'd had tonight when they called his name. "I took a federal appointment," I said, "civilian intelligence. I've been going through confirmation for almost a year. It came through 6 weeks ago. My father was quiet for a long time." "You didn't tell me," he said. "I couldn't, not while it was pending. And now? Now I can." He looked at the flag for a while. Then he said, "I let her tell people things. I know, I should have." He stopped. "Dad, I should have asked you," he said, "instead of just letting the story go. I knew it wasn't right. The whole story never felt right to me. I just—" He exhaled. "I let it go." I had thought about this moment before, had imagined it in different versions, with different words and different amounts of anger. I had imagined saying things that would make it clear exactly how much the silence had cost me over the years, but standing there with my father, holding his plaque, and looking at photographs of men who had given everything to a country that did not always give back, I didn't feel angry. I felt something more like tired, and more like love, and more like the desire to be finished with carrying the wrong version of things. "I know you did," I said. "It's okay. It's not really." "No," I said. "Not really." "No," I said. "Not really. But it can be." He put his arm around my shoulders, the way he used to when I was small. We stood there like that, in front of the flag, for a minute, and the man with the push-broom worked his way across the room, and the fluorescents hummed. Renee did not speak to me for the rest of the evening. I saw her once more, near the door, talking to the post commander's wife, in a voice that was slightly too bright and slightly too fast, the way people talk when they are performing composure. She did not look at me. I did not go over to her. There will be a conversation eventually. There will probably be several. Renee is not a person who lets things settle without trying to reshape them, and I have lived long enough to know that people like Renee rarely change in the ways you want them to. What changes, if you're lucky, is that you stop needing them to. I'm not there yet, entirely. But I'm closer than I was when I drove into Caldwell. I left the next morning, early, before the town was fully awake. My father walked me to my car in the driveway and handed me a thermos of coffee and told me to text when I got in. He said he was proud of me. He said it like he meant it, which he did, and also like it was something he should have said more, which it was. I told him I loved him. He stood in the driveway until I turned off the street. The highway back through the hills was quiet at that hour. The kudzu still and dark green in the early light, the sky that particular pale blue-grey that Tennessee does in the morning before the heat comes in. I drove with the radio off for the first 20 minutes, and then I turned it on, and the local station was playing something country and old and familiar, and I left it there. There is a version of that story where I go back to Caldwell with something to prove, where I wear the uniform, or name drop, or find a way to make sure Renee knows before the night is over that she had the wrong story. I understand that version. I have wanted to be that version of myself more times than I can count, but the thing I have learned, the thing the work taught me, the thing that all those years of being asked to be quiet and precise and undetected taught me, is that you don't have to announce yourself. The truth has a way of finding the room on its own when the time is right. You just have to be patient enough to let it. I was patient for a long time. I think I can be patient a little longer. I've thought a lot about what Renee said that night at the coat table. Not because it still stings, it mostly doesn't, not any more, but because of how casually she said it. Like she'd rehearsed it so many times it had stopped feeling like a lie and had just become the version she believed. Not everyone who serves makes it a career. There's no shame in that. She said it to Gary's wife with a smile on her face, and she genuinely seemed to believe she was being kind. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. Renee wasn't a villain in the dramatic sense. She wasn't sitting somewhere plotting ways to diminish me, she just told a story that was convenient, told it often enough that it calcified, and then defended it because backing down would have required admitting she'd been wrong for years in front of people who respected her. That's a very human thing to do. It doesn't make it right. But understanding it has been more useful to me than staying angry about it. What I kept coming back to, driving home through those Tennessee hills, was what it cost me to stay quiet all those years. Not in terms of pride. I was never that attached to being acknowledged by people in Caldwell. But in terms of my father. He heard the story. He let it stand because it was easier than asking. And there's a version of events where I hold on to that grievance forever, where every holiday phone call carries the weight of what he didn't do when it mattered. I don't want to live in that version. What I've learned, slowly, and not without resistance, is that integrity isn't something you perform for an audience. You can't be a person of discipline and precision and quiet competence only in the rooms where people can see you and then abandon it when you go home for the weekend. The work I do requires a certain consistency of character. You have to be the same person in every room, whether or not anyone in that room knows who you are. I had been practicing that for years without realizing I was practicing it. And that night, in the American Legion Hall, the practice held, Major General Coffey didn't know what Renee had told people. He didn't walk over to correct anyone's story, or to make a point. He walked over because he saw someone he respected, and he responded to that, honestly. That's all it was. The truth didn't need any help from me. It just needed a room and enough time. I think about that when things feel slow or unrecognized or unfair. And they do, still, because that's just what life is sometimes. I think about the years I spent doing the work without anyone in my hometown knowing about it, and I think about how none of those years were wasted. Every one of them was building something real, even when the only person who could see it was me. My father stood in his driveway the next morning and told me he was proud of me. He said it simply, without decoration. I think he was also saying something else underneath it, something about the years of not asking, of letting Renee fill the silence. But he didn't have the words for that part yet. And that's okay. Some things get said in pieces, over time. I can be patient. The kudzu was still on the highway when I drove out, green and relentless, climbing over everything that holds still long enough. I left the radio on this time.